Colé is possible to be executed beautifully in a Franco-Belgian approach and just as beautifully in a Russian technique or Golden Era violin technique approach. The fact that the approach is different does not diminish or elevate one or the other. You can still have a beautiful, articulate, strong tone at the frog using a Golden Era technique to perform your colay. Everything I've shown you up to this point in today's training has come from the first section of the broader tutorials, which is aptly named the basics. This section covers critical foundational components of Golden Era violin bow technique. Now I'd like to show you an excerpt from the second section of the tutorials, which addresses standard bow techniques. Here I am addressing bow techniques you'll recognize, such as détaché, martelé, bow distribution, dynamic contrast, and much, much more. Today I'll share a portion of the lesson on colay, a very important bow stroke to be able to implement with any technical approach. I feel it is important to include in today's training because the execution of colay in Golden Era violin technique differs somewhat from the Franco-Belgian approach. I will show you the difference in execution, and I will teach you how to get a beautiful colay with the Golden Era violin technique. This is a technique that is just a very short and articulate up bow that is close to the frog. You're going to still use power from your shoulder. You're still going to check to make sure your elbow is the correct height for the string level. You're still going to listen for an articulate tone. This is my colay. And you can see that I am still very flexible with my fingers and my wrist, even though the motor is not powered. The motor is not my wrist. It is not powered from my wrist. You can still see the flexibility. With respect to the difference between the Franco-Belgian approach to colay and the Russian approach, as I mentioned, the Russian approach is going to come from the shoulder. It's going to still employ the weight of my arm. The Franco-Belgian approach to colay is going to involve a much bigger action from my wrist and fingers. I will not be able to model the Franco-Belgian approach to colay because my fingers don't have that training anymore. But it's going to involve a lot more wrist and fingers. So the stroke is coming mostly from the wrist and the fingers as well. But I'm just showing you the difference in the mechanics, okay? So the colay looks like this in the Franco-Belgian approach. I prefer the tone that is available through using the natural weight of my arm and checking to make sure that the height of my bow arm is coming from above the string so that I can draw the sound out using the natural weight. There may be some Franco-Belgian players who disagree that this is a true colay, okay? But you can hear that I'm getting a beautiful tone. I'm doing a short bow stroke at the frog, and there is still some flexibility in my bow hand, okay? Can you see that my bow hand is still reacting a little bit, but it's just not that the complete action is coming from my wrist and fingers. The action is primarily coming from my shoulder, but there is flexibility. It does not mean that just because I'm coming from my shoulder that I have to stay rigid, okay? I think this is a common misconception. Critics of this Golden Era violin technique will try to claim that the bow hand is completely stiff, okay? When I'm trying to do a stroke like colay, okay, that there isn't any flexibility. The only reason why it seems that way to them is because it doesn't include the action from the wrist. And so in some approaches, they may believe that the colay is, the wrist action is what creates a successful colay. But it is not what creates the successful colay. As long as you have the resultant tone and the resultant articulation that is desired, then the colay can be successfully executed with either technical approach. So it's not a stiff bow hand. It's a relaxed hanging bow hand that can react to the motion that comes from my shoulder, as opposed to the action that comes from my wrist. The important thing to remember is that colay is possible to be executed beautifully in a Franco-Belgian approach and just as beautifully in a Russian technique or Golden Era violin technique approach. The fact that the approach is different, in my opinion, does not diminish or elevate one or the other. It's just a completely different approach, and you can still have a beautiful, articulate, strong tone at the frog using a Golden Era technique to perform your colay.